So with the upcoming season 8 of Game of Thrones, I'm sure all of us have been counting the weeks now until its release. I myself have been passing the time by slowly reading the books, but more importantly playing the games. You know, I started thinking about this after seeing the incredible mods that have been created about this series in games like Skyrim and Crusader Kings. Yet no one even talks about or even seems to remember the real Game of Thrones games. And I'm pretty sure there's a good reason for that, but with that being said, let's take a look back at these games and see if any of them are actually any good. Doing a quick Google search will tell you that there's not a whole lot of games based on the series, when you take into account that 3 of them don't even exist at this point, and another game is a multiplayer text-based adventure, which, yeah, I'm not going to look at. Also, I'm going to be skipping over Game of Thrones Genesis because honestly the front page on Steam speaks for itself. I'm not an expert when it comes to strategy games, and the reviews all warn me not to spend a dime on this cash-in. So the first game I'll be playing is Game of Thrones, released in 2012 on PC, Xbox 360 and PS3, which is the version I'll be playing on. Well, after a pretty bland main menu, the game begins with Conleth Hill giving us a quick backstory on Robert Baratheon's rebellion, before introducing us to one of our protagonists, Sir Mors Westford. We start off with Castle Black, and the first chapter sets the stage on what we'll be doing throughout the game. You see, this is supposed to be a role-playing game. We're given the character's backstory, and similar to something like Fallout, we can invest points into our character's attributes and build them up by leveling up. There's also stance points, hero points, skill points, and a fairly unique system where you choose strengths to give you advantages like extra damage for your teammates or higher chances to stun an enemy, but it has to be balanced out with weaknesses, encouraging that a bit of thought goes into your character beforehand. The opening cutscene for Chapter 1 is incredibly boring and lifeless. It looks like these characters give less of a shit than I do. I don't know, there just doesn't seem to be any emotion behind these shitty textured faces. It's as if the voice actors only had one take to say these lines and it was the first time they actually read the script.
Tell me, where is Mormont?
The Lord Commander is in front of the Commander's Keep with the new recruits. They've just sworn their oaths.
So they are finally sworn brothers of the Night's Watch.
We're kept engaged through dialogue trees, but they don't really affect the story much in the beginning. In fact, most of these choices are just 2 different ways of saying the same thing. The only redeeming part is listening to Lord Commander Mormont, voiced by his real life actor in the show, but it's like he gives us this 10-minute backstory on the wall, which I'm sure anyone playing this game already knows about. I've got to say though, being able to roam around Castle Black as a man of the Night's Watch was surprisingly fun. Then we get to trying out the combat, which, you know, I'd be lying if I said it was bad. It's certainly something I haven't seen much in games, but it honestly grew on me over time. To fight, you press R1 to bring up your action abilities, and you can queue up to 3 at a time at the cost of energy points. These include things like knocking down an enemy, drinking health potions, or executing a critical attack, to name a few. There's no way to effectively dodge or block an incoming attack, instead it's left up to chance whether the opponent lands their hit. Weapons and armor play a key role, as certain weapons are more effective than others depending on what armor an enemy is wearing, and heavier armor may give you more hit points but decreases your deflection and energy regen. You can also control members of your party and give them separate orders, so you're not having to frustratingly rely on them during combat, as what they do is entirely up to you. This actually leads to encounters that requires a fair amount of strategy before a fight, and at some points the game encourages that type of thinking, so the combat is fine, I guess. After the first chapter is completed, we immediately are introduced to our second character, Alliser Sarwyck. And I'm sorry, but these voices are just terrible, to the point where it sounds like his lines were recorded off a text-to-speech converter.
Now you return as if nothing happened.
The reasons for my alone, I owe you no explanation.
Anyway, we learn that Alliser is the eldest son to a deceased Lord of Riverspring, who left his home for 15 years and now has finally returned to bury his father. After a few awkward cutscenes and this, Alliser learns that his bastard brother Valar has made his claim to become the new Lord of Riverspring, with the backing of Queen Cersei Lannister. But things aren't that simple though, as Alliser, for some unknown reason, despises his bastard brother and can't let this happen. So that's the main gist of Alliser Sarwyck's story. While up in the north at the Wall, Mors Westford receives a letter from the recently deceased Jon Arryn, asking him to find and protect a young girl that he sent away from King's Landing. I know at this point the story sounds very dull and generic, especially in the first few hours, but I was surprised at how deep this whole plot went as the chapters went on, seeing how the past of these 2 characters intertwine and the threats that they're up against. Once you start to settle into this game, you'll start to notice flaws almost everywhere you look. It's very apparent that this game is unfinished, unpolished, and just in general lacks detail.
I will do as I please. I'm a deserter from the Night's Watch, and I'm being...
I'm done with this craven.
Now remember, this game came out in 2012, so comparing it against the likes of Mass Effect 3, Dishonored, or Journey isn't doing this game any favours. And it's simple stuff, like every time you open a door, it opens towards you so your character clips through it and acts like it was nothing. Also, whenever there's a scene with a large audience, the same character model is copy and pasted side by side, which just illustrates how rushed this game was. It doesn't look like there was any ambition to try and push the PS3 to its limits here, and the result makes most of the areas you'll visit feel empty and lifeless. I mean, it's fine at Castle Black, I guess, but then you look at somewhere that should be more crowded like King's Landing for example, and god, you'd think no more than 20 people live in the city. Despite the abundance of visual glitches, poor voice acting, and overall low effort put into this game, there is still a somewhat engaging story here that kept me from turning the game off. There were a few unexpected plot twists, but it's a shame that the best parts aren't until the last couple of hours. It takes a lot of perseverance from the player, especially if they are unfamiliar with this world, and I doubt that many would want to stick around after seeing this game's mediocre first impressions. All I'll say is that I thought the ending was satisfactory at the least. So would I recommend this game? Well, it depends. If you enjoy RPGs and are a huge Game of Thrones fan, then I'd say give it a try. Just don't expect much. But other than that, no, definitely not. However, if you still are a fan of the show but don't enjoy RPGs, then this next game may be worth checking out. Telltale's Game of Thrones is probably the game that most people think of when talking about the series. It came out after Season 4 and during Season 5 when the show was becoming way more popular, compared to the last game that only had Season 1. What made this game such a big deal at the time was that a lot of the main actors from the show would be making appearances, and you as the player would be able to interact with them. We have Kit Harington, Peter Dinklage, Lena Headey, Emilia Clarke, Iwan Rheon, and Natalie Dormer, which already made this game more interesting from the start.
Roderick! We've had a lovely time together. Say it. Say it's been lovely.
Plus, Telltale games were probably at their peak by this point, and who better to make a narrative-driven game than them? The ones who had already had their success with The Walking Dead. With that being said though, I find Telltale's Game of Thrones to be just alright. It wasn't amazing or anything, but it was admittedly fun at times. You play as House Forrester, a lesser house which is known for producing ironwood and being loyal to the Starks during the War of the Five Kings. You get to play as 5 characters, 4 of them from House Forrester that are spread out at King's Landing, the Free Cities and their home Ironrath. You also take control of Garrett Tuttle, a squire to House Forrester who was exiled and joins the Night's Watch. The game's main plot is about the Forresters trying to keep their house alive after the Boltons take over the north, and they come under pressure from Lud Whitehill, who wants a piece of their ironwood forest and ultimately take it over entirely. You get to experience key moments from the TV show like the Red Wedding, Tyrion's arrest, and the Siege of Meereen, which are easily the highlights out of the 6 episodes. Also, being able to form close bonds with Jon Snow or Tyrion Lannister really heightened the immersion for me. I'll be honest though, despite this game being focused on your choices, there's not a whole lot that can drastically change the ending, aside from the last 2 episodes. This was my second playthrough in order to get the footage, and I found that I had some of the same outcomes even though I made the opposite choices. Ethan dies no matter what, Garrett Tuttle gets arrested anyway, and, well, spoilers, the house gets destroyed. Doesn't matter if it's Roderick or Asher there, or if it was Lud or Griff Whitehill. I get that some of these things have to happen in order for the plot to move forward, but it just feels unnatural at times. The graphics are what you would expect from a Telltale game. Nothing impressive, but this was probably due to the developers wanting to get this onto any device, including smartphones and tablets. I liked how they recreated the opening, and it helped to make each episode feel like an episode from the show. It definitely has a lot of the same elements, like the scheming, the betrayals, and the action. Overall, I'd say definitely give this game a try, especially since episode 1 is free, so you've got nothing to lose. Except your time, I guess. It's a game that any Game of Thrones fan can easily play, as you're basically taking part in an interactive show with little to no challenge. So with that being said, hopefully you check these games out, and let's just hope for now that Season 8 will live up to the hype everyone's been giving it. Thanks for watching.